Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm wrapping up all the books I read in October, and we're just gonna dive straight in because I have a pretty short list this month. So first things first, I read What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. This is the third book in the Sworn Soldier series, which follows Alex, who is a sworn soldier from a fictional European country called Galatia. This is set, I think, shortly before the 1900s or right at the early 1900s, kind of that time period. And in this particular installment, we're following Alex as they are traveling to America to help out their friend Denton, who's a doctor in America, and they end up meeting Denton and his other friend, John Ingold, and they're there because Denton's cousin has gone missing in a creepy coal mine in West Virginia, and so the group is traveling to this coal mine to try and figure out what happened to the cousin. And it's just a really great installment of this series. I really like the new character we get, John Ingold. I think he adds a really interesting new dynamic to the story, and through him we learn a lot more about Denton, which I found really interesting. I also really liked just seeing Alex kind of grappling with everything they've seen across the first two books, and then having to deal with that while going into like this new horrific situation to try and help Denton and his cousin. And I just really enjoyed all the character dynamics here. I think the horror in this one is particularly good. I really liked the reveal, as it were, of the monster. I also really enjoyed a lot of the other elements of the horror, because there's a lot of, like, claustrophobia, and they're being kind of trapped in this small, cramped, dark coal mine. So I think that it makes a really effective use of its setting, and I just really enjoyed everything about this one. I think this might be my new favorite in the series. Previously, the first book in the series, What Moves the Dead, was my favorite, but I think that this one has just kind of topped it a little bit. It has, edged it out of that number one slot just a little, and I'm convinced that I will read as many books as T. Kingfisher wants to write in the series, because I just enjoy them every time. After that, I worked on a vlog about vampire classics. I had 3 short vampire classics I wanted to get to. So to start, I had this edition of Frankenstein, which has within it A Fragment by Lord Byron and The Vampire by John Polidori, which are the other 2 stories that came out of the competition that resulted in Frankenstein. And I thought this was really interesting because A Fragment and The Vampire have a lot of commonalities between them, so it was really interesting reading those back to back. I'm not really rating them because they're so short, there's not much to rate them on, especially A Fragment, which is literally like 5 pages. I think that the story that A Fragment is setting up would have been really interesting if we'd seen the completed story, but I also feel like maybe Lord Byron got bored writing it. The Vampire also has a lot of interesting elements. We do get the full story, so I think I did, like in my own spreadsheet, give it like 3.5 stars. I enjoyed a lot of elements of it. I like the kind of dread that it creates, but it's also just like super short. There's not a lot going on. And then finally, I read Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, which I just found out like earlier today. It says edited by Carmen Maria Chado. It is apparently more heavily edited than I thought. I did not read the introduction because I know introductions often spoil endings, so I didn't read that part of it. But I found out today that it is more heavily edited than I was thinking it was, because I'm more familiar with like scholarly editions where the editing is like very clearly earmarked and you kind of know going in because of the introduction what that editing looks like. But yeah, I still really enjoyed this. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars, and the things that brought it down for me, the things that kept it from being a 5-star, I think were probably elements of the original text having to do with structure and pacing, less to do with the sort of line-to-line reading of the story. So I probably will at some point seek out a less heavily edited edition of the story to check out. But on a first read and just kind of getting the gist of the story and the characters, I thought this was fun. I thought it was interesting. I think it's a little bit abrupt. If you want to see any of my kind of more long form, as I'm reading it, thoughts on any of these stories, I will also link the vlog that I created about them. Finally, I also read Moan by Junji Ito, which I really enjoyed. I've been wanting to get to more of his short story collections, and this is actually the most recent. This one's just come out in October of this year, and this one I thought was a really interesting collection of stories in that I think every story had a really clear like emotional core to it, where I think I haven't noticed that as much in some of his other work that I've read, but each story has like a very clear like human flaw that a lot of it's oriented around that may or may not be directly connected to the horror that's being experienced, but is like the core for the characters and how they've gotten in this situation. So I found that really interesting. We got some stuff about like greed and jealousy. We've got a character who has a really interesting representation of OCD that I thought was really engaging. As someone who experiences OCD myself, I thought that it kind of leans into villainizing that character a little bit, but I think it's a nuanced enough and a complex enough like depiction that you can read it a couple of different ways, and I personally read it in a way that I just kind of connected with this character, and I thought that she was not quite, I think, aware of how much her actions were affecting the people around her, and to kind of like in it to see that. So I thought that she was a really interesting character, and I thought it was an interesting depiction of OCD. I think my favorite story in this one is actually the final one though, which is I would say like the least horrific of this particular collection. It's about like a school reunion and a time capsule. I really liked the reveal of it. That was another one that kind of had this sort of central core that was, I believe, sort of bitterness and like grudge holding that I thought was really interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed this collection. I think some of the stories end really abruptly. I think that was my major issue here, is a lot of those stories kind of end before they feel like they've really gotten started. But overall, I thought this was a really strong and really interesting set of stories from Junji Ito. So, these are all of the books that I read in October. Let me know down in the comments below what you read in October and what's like particularly stuck with you as we're moving into November. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. This is the second video I'm ending accidentally dropping shit, so love that from me. Yeah, if you have enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe and subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting at least one video a week, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.